it's hard to believe, but a year from now, the 2020 presidential race will have begun. The policy issues will have been hammered out at the platform of the Democratic convention that's going to be held in July, and that will be completed a few weeks later at the Republican one in August. So what are the big issues? Well, tonight we have Amy Walter, who is going to give us some insights. She is one of the country's top political forecasts and analysts. She is known to be smart, savvy, and very well trusted in Washington. She also was named one of the top 50 journalists in Washington, which is a very tough town to get such an accolade. Her biography is in your program, but just to highlight, her current position is as national editor of the Cook Political Report, and previously she had covered the House of Representatives there. Before that, she was the political director of ABC News in DC. Many of you might know her from Politics Monday segment at the NewsHour, PBS's NewsHour. And since it's Monday, we have our very own show right here in Steamboat. She also has a public radio podcast called The Takeaway, which airs on KUNC as well as many, many other public radio stations. A couple of weeks ago, I got in the car, turned the radio on to KUNC, and heard a promo for a new podcast series for Steamboat, seminars at Steamboat, yay. And then the show that aired next was Amy Walters in The Takeaway. Today, we don't have to turn on the radio or TV to hear her comments. She's here right now, and let's welcome her.
Thank you, everybody. That's so nice. Thank you for that wonderful welcome. I've been having a great time. My family's here. I had a little difficulty coming up those stairs because we've had a little too much fun mountain biking, so I can't even unscrew this cap. I'm so sore right now. Sorry about that. So we've taken full advantage of our time here. You guys have a fantastic place. I know you know it. I'm sorry I'm going to be telling other people about it. So, sorry. Right, if you don't want me to, you can buy me off with a nice place here. 5 for a place here. That's it. That's all I'm asking for. Thank you for the invitation to come here. Been emailing with Bob now for, I don't know, what is it, 2 or 3 years about making this happen, so I'm glad we finally got to make this work out. And Jane is right. The 2020 election is upon us, but when hasn't it been upon us? We've been pretty much in the middle of it since the election ended in 2016. We've been in the middle of the 2020 election. So what I wanted to do tonight, though, is to try to get away from what we're steeped in every day. All of us who try to keep up with the news, sometimes it feels overwhelming, right? Because you're bombarded with information everywhere you turn. You don't really know whether to trust it, to not trust it, whether it's a big deal or not a big deal. This is information you're getting from cable. This is information you're getting over social media. If you were one of those people who made the mistake, as I did, to sign up for breaking news alerts because you thought that was a good idea, and then you just are constantly buzzing all the time with your phone, it's hard to figure out what matters and what doesn't. And that's what I wanted to do tonight. Instead of focusing on the tweets or the chaos or the individual, whatever sort of outrage that cable news is ginning up right now, let's step back and look at the fundamentals. What matters, as I said, what matters, what doesn't, going into 2020. The first thing that always matters in an election where there's an incumbent president is how people feel about the incumbent president. But the other thing that really matters is the fact that it's really hard to beat an incumbent president, okay? They don't lose very often. And in fact, if you go back for the last 8 elections, the last 8 presidents, 6 out of those 8 have won re-election. The most recent to lose, of course, was George H.W. Bush in 1992, but he was also something of a unicorn in his own way. He was elected, of course, in 1988 after a Republican had served in office for 2 consecutive terms. That's really hard to do in politics. Beating an incumbent president, hard. Winning the presidency after your party has held it for 2 terms, even harder. So his losing, of course, that still counts as an incumbent president, losing re-election. But the last time we had really and truly a first-term president who won without that distinction of being the 3rd in a row for one party was Jimmy Carter, of course, right, in 1976. Before Jimmy Carter, you gotta go back to Hoover, all right? It's the last one, and I don't count Ford. Ford, I know, kind of counts, but he wasn't elected in the first place. So it's hard, let's just put it that way, to lose as an incumbent. It's also really hard to lose as an incumbent, or if you're the challenger, to beat an incumbent when things are going well, at least when the economy is going well. And by all measures, both the sort of economic indicator numbers, if you're talking about GDP, if you're talking about unemployment, if you're talking about sort of the numbers that economists use to grade and gauge the economy, we're doing well. But people also think they are doing well personally. They think the economy is doing pretty well. If you look, I'm thankful for the NPR folks in the audience here. Not so long ago, a poll taken with by Marist College for NPR, the PBS NewsHour, found that 65% of voters said that the economy is working well for them personally. They feel personally good about the economy, including 46% of Democrats, okay? Back in 2016, this is according to CNBC, just 25% of Americans said that they thought the economy was good or excellent. In May, the last time CNBC asked this question, that number was up to 50%, right? So these are, again, those are great numbers to have as an incumbent president. Good economy, people feeling good about the economy, and yet, there's something about this president, right, that's not sort of making that connection between things look really good, but things don't look so great for his reelection. Like everything with this president, he has to be unique, different, unorthodox, right? We very rarely see a president whose overall approval numbers are much lower than the approval numbers on his handling of the economy. That doesn't normally happen. Right now, what we see is in his national polling, you ask people, do you approve, disapprove of the job the president's doing? It's somewhere around between 43, 45% right now. If you ask voters how they think he's handling the economy, most polls he's at or a little bit over 50%. Ron Brownstein, who does a lot of great work for CNN, for Atlantic, he looked at polls, some of the national polls recently, and what he found is this president's overall approval ratings are about 16 to 19 points lower than the approval ratings on the economy, right? They usually go hand in glove. Why are presidents reelected? Why is it easy to win reelection when you're an incumbent president when the economy's good? Because people say if the economy's good, why should we change horses, right? Let's stick with this one. But in this case, there's a disconnect. People feeling better about the economy, feel good about the president's handling of it, and don't like him. Now, some of it is actually not exclusively about him, okay? This has been happening over, I would say, the last 10 or 15 years, where we're seeing this disconnect between how people feel personally about the economy and how they feel about their elected leaders. So they are detaching their own personal feelings from how they're voting. And that really, it's not so much how you feel the economy is doing or how the economy is doing by empirical standards, but where you sit politically will determine how you feel the economy is going, okay? So the Michigan Consumer Index has been asking for years, how do you feel about your own consumer expectations, right? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? And what they found is that starting really with the George W. Bush years and going into Trump, that there was really this big disconnect between your ability to, or your interest in showing a positive economic forecast if the president in the White House was of a different party than yours, okay? Just go look, if you are really into this, go to the Michigan Consumer Index site, look at their reports, and look at what they did for 2018. And what they found was, going into the 2016 elections, Democrats, when asked how they think the economy's going, how optimistic are they, they're like, it's great, things are going great, feel really good. Republicans, it's terrible, awful, no good economy, right? So that's going into November. In February, they asked the question again. Republicans think the economy is awesome. And Democrats think it is terrible. Oh my God, it's a Great Depression, right? Nothing happened. We didn't fall into the Great Depression. The GDP didn't go up 15%, right? The only thing that changed was the person sitting in the White House. So they decided, well, let's look back historically. Has this always been the case? And they looked back and said, well, the difference between how Republicans and Democrats view the economy when certain presidents are in office. So the gap, right? How Republicans feel about it versus how Democrats feel about the economy with each president. So with Ronald Reagan, that gap was about 19 points. By the time we get to George W. Bush, it's gone up a little bit more to 21 points. We get to Obama, it's 24 points. With Donald Trump, because again, everything's got to be different. With Donald Trump, it's 55 points, okay? If you're a Republican, you think it's going great. If you're a Democrat, you think it's terrible. It doesn't matter personally how you're doing or feeling or what you're seeing, but where your partisanship is going to determine how you feel about the economy. So that's a big part of the disconnect, again, between a good economy elects presidents, a bad economy defeats them. But let's face it, a lot of this is not just about a trend line, because we went from 24 to 55, right? We had a slow increase from Reagan to Obama, and then it exploded with Trump. A lot of it is, of course, about him and his style and the way he's chosen to be president. Look, people elect presidents for a whole lot of reasons, but the presidency itself and the ways in which people view the president is more than just like something that an algorithm can do, or that something like a data point is going to be able to tell you. People view the presidency much more personally than they do many other things they do in life. That's not really a breakthrough concept, but it's just important to understand that even as things that we know influence people's perception of the president himself also, the way he carries himself, the way he uses the office is very important in judging whether or not you approve of that president and whether you want to re-elect that president. This president, we looked back to see how challenging it's been for this president, how people have viewed this president, and it's been amazingly consistent, but not in a good way. We've been looking at polling, the big national polls that have been taken since he was sworn in back in January of 2017 until now. There have been 337 major polls that assess the president's job approval ratings. He has been underwater, in other words, more people disapprove than approve of him, in 336 of those polls, right? 337, he's not been above water in any of them but one. We've never seen that before. Compared to the last 5 presidents, he is also been the quickest to hit a disapproval rating of 50%. It took Barack Obama 572 days to get to that number. It took Bill Clinton 150 days to get to that number. It took Donald Trump 5 days to get to that number. So, but here's the thing. His numbers don't move much. You probably have noticed that, right? He has also had the narrowest trading range of any president, at least in modern history. His approval rating doesn't get really much above 45%. In fact, in Gallup polls, it hasn't gotten over 45%. But it also hasn't fallen below 35%. So this gap, is what I call the trading range, between the high and the low of just 11 points, very narrow. Now again, some of this is a continuation of a trend we have been seeing starting with George W. Bush, right? That partisans lock in pretty early in a president's tenure and they don't move, no matter what else is happening, right? Good things, bad things, internal things, external things. His numbers do not budge. But every action in the president's case does not have an equal reaction, right? Part of the reason that these numbers don't move is that the president has locked in his base, and they are with him and they aren't moving from him. And I think it's important to remember, though, how remarkable that is. And I mean that in a very positive, remarkable way. Think about where he was back in 2015, came down that golden escalator, all right? We started seeing polls come out assessing Republicans' views of of then candidate Donald Trump. His approval rating among Republicans was 40%, with 60% disapproving, or in this case, favorable, unfavorable. 100% of Republicans, pretty much 100% of the country knew who Donald Trump was, right? And in politics, as in life, if people know you, you got 100% recognition, people don't really change their minds about you, right? Have you changed your mind about somebody you know really, really well? You haven't. I mean, something might change your mind, but you pretty much have locked in on your opinion of that person. And changing from feeling good or bad about them is really tough. So when that race started in 2015, we said a number of things. I will admit, I was one of these people that wrote these things, okay? The guy has 60% of Republicans dislike him, and he's very well known. He can't win the nomination. Plus, he's so different from Republicans. He's not a Republican, right? He's truly been all things. He's been a Democrat, he's been a Reform Party candidate, he's been on this side of gun debate, that side of the gun debate, this side of the abortion debate, that side of the abortion debate. He has this personal life that's intriguing, probably not gonna work really well with evangelical voters, right? You can't call John McCain not a war hero, that's never gonna fly, right? And at every moment, it looked like that coalition of Republicans was gonna fall apart. And again, I wrote that a lot too. This is it. This is the time Republican Party is gonna break apart. It always came back together. My analogy I used was, throughout 2016, was that Donald Trump was like an organ that had been transplanted into a body, okay? Like, think about, I don't know, a kidney or liver, something like that. The body is the Republican Party, right? It's this foreign object going in there. And I kept thinking, like, all right, at some point, the body's gonna reject it, right? Like, you can give all the drugs, all of the IV, whatever you need to do to keep you alive and keep your liver functioning, but it's not gonna work. Well, it did work, and it continues to work. And right now, if we're gonna stick with this analogy, he is the body. He's not just the liver, the kidney, he is the Republican Party, and they have come along with him. And this also explains why he is where he is in terms of his overall approval ratings, why this disconnect between economy and approval is because he has focused intensely on keeping that base together. He has been committed since the day the election ended, not to branching out and reaching out and bringing in new voters, right? Despite the fact that he didn't win the popular vote, despite the fact that while he won the Electoral College, it was by winning states by especially Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, by less than 80,000 votes. Normally, a politician would see those numbers and think, okay, what do I need to do to get my agenda passed? What do I need to do to win re-election? Oh, I just need to win over some of those other folks, right? Bring in those people maybe who were reluctant Hillary Clinton supporters, maybe people who stayed at home in 2016, and all while keeping the people who did like me. But that's not what's happened, of course. The focus has been completely on the 46% who voted for him in 2016 and who are sitting in Congress right now, and keeping those voters and that base happy has been the sole commitment of this presidency. And it has meant that he has kept the party together. And he has an 85, 90% approval rating with Republicans that has not really wavered all that much. But as I said, his encouragement and constant sort of stirring of his base, keeping them engaged at all times, means that he's also stirred up the other side, right? In a way that they weren't stirred up in 2016. And this is where I said every action has an opposite, but in this case, not equal reaction. The people who intensely support the president, people that in polling language we say strongly approve, are a smaller group than people who strongly disapprove, okay? So, and it's been pretty much like this since the moment he was sworn into office, since the very first polls that we've seen. The people who are the, yes, you can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, I will still support you, right? That's the very strong approve. That's somewhere around 20, 25% of people who already feel favorably about him, okay? That intense support, they will stick with him no matter what. But the people who say, I disapprove, and disapprove with the fury of 1,000 burning suns, right? Cannot stand him, is closer to 45%, right? It's been sometimes a 2-to-1 difference, mostly though a 1.2, 1.5 degree difference. So the intensity is on the disapprove side, not on the approve side. So his base is there and it's strong and they're committed to him, but they are not as big and they are not as enthusiastic as the people who dislike him. The other thing to remember about 2016, we talked a lot about his base, we talked a lot about his ability to keep Republicans together, but he also won independent voters. He got 46% of the independent vote. Hillary Clinton got 44%. And today, if you look at the Gallup and his average among independents, it's only 39%. All right? So what I laid out looks like a pretty grim picture for the president, right? He's got the good economy, he's got incumbency going for him, but the good economy isn't necessarily improving his odds, at least they're not improving his numbers. And the numbers nationally look pretty daunting. So why are we even having this conversation, right? Like, is he even gonna win? Should we even be talking about 2020? And the answer is that I don't think he can win the popular vote, but he can sure win the electoral college vote. And my colleague over at the Cook Report, David Wasserman, just wrote a piece the other week entitled, How Trump Could Lose by 5 Million Votes and Still Win. So let's walk through that scenario because it's not a crazy scenario. We all know, we learned this the first time around in 2000, popular vote, it's nice, but the electoral vote is what you want, right, to win. There are 10 states that are going to determine who the president of the United States is, and those are the same 10 states that were the closest in 2016. Trump won the lion's share of those very closest states. He won 6 of those 10. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Arizona, Florida. Hillary Clinton won 4 of those very close states, Maine, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Nevada. Now here's the challenge for the president. Those 6 states equal 100 electoral votes. He got 305 electoral votes in 2016. So about 1/3 of his electoral college victory came from states that he won by the narrowest of margins, in some cases, like the Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, by less than 1%, all right? That's not where you want to be. That's a lot of exposure as a candidate, right? To have a third of your haul in states that you won by a very narrow margin. Hillary Clinton's closest equal 24 votes. So the good news for her is she won her most competitive states in places that don't have as many people. So that 24 electoral votes was only about 10% of her total, right? So if you do the math and you look and you say, well, what should Democrats do in 2020? How do they win then the 270 electoral votes they need to get? You look at those 10 states and say, well, sure seems to me that they should go to the 3 states where Trump had the narrowest margins, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. If the Democratic nominee wins all the states Clinton did, including the 4 that I mentioned that she barely won, that's 278 electoral votes. That's it, that's done, it's over. You don't need Ohio, you don't need Texas, you don't need North Carolina, you don't need Florida, okay? Just everything Hillary Clinton did plus the 3 states, which, enter Joe Biden now with the Ray-Ban sunglasses and the Camaro, right? And he's like, I'm the guy to win those back, right? It's me, it's Uncle Joe. I'm from Scranton, where I'm gonna get to him in a minute, but you can see why so much focus on those 3 states would make likely that Democrats would want the candidate who could be the most likely to capture those states. And Democrats did do well in those 3 states in the midterms. They won statewide races for Senate and governor in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So it could be done, say Democrats. Here's the thing with that. And this goes to my colleagues win by 5 million but still lose the Electoral College. If you look at the census data as he knows how to do and I don't, which is why he's able to do wonderful quantitative work for us, he found that, and it's not surprising, the most diversifying states in the country, in other words, states where the share of white voters has been decreasing steadily over the last 10 years, those states that have been diversifying the fastest are also states that are also pretty firmly blue, right? California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Maryland, Washington, Oregon. Texas has been diversifying a lot. And obviously you saw the 2018 election where Beto O'Rourke came very close to beating Ted Cruz, but still only got 48%. The states that have not been diversifying very quickly and who also have some of the highest share of older white voters and white voters without a college degree, which, as many of you know, this is the Trump core, this is the Trump base, live in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And then Nate Cohn from the New York Times Upshot wrote a piece a few weeks ago that also looked at who turned out and who didn't turn out in 2018. So Democrats had a great night in 2018, even in those 3 states, as I said. But he wanted to see who were the people who voted in 2016 but didn't vote in 2018. And what he found was the people who stayed home in 2018, those people thought the highest of Donald Trump than any of the other groups who did vote in 2018. Okay, so Trump's approval ratings were highest among people who voted in 2016 but stayed at home in 2018. He had a 50% approval rating among those voters. That's the Trump strategy. I'm going to get to that in a minute, right, is making sure that those voters turn out. And a lot of those voters, as I said, those are his voters who live in those 3 key battleground states. The next issue, of course, which we're all dying to know is, all right, so we know what the president's challenges are, we know what the map's looking like a little bit. Who's gonna face Trump? Who's the Democrat who's gonna be up against him? Right now, we know there are about 576 candidates running, all of whom think that they're gonna be the one. But I think it's pretty clear, even though we're still early in the season, And yes, anything can change, but I think this race is really coming down to 4 candidates. It's likely to stay that way. It could be, I'm keeping an eye on 6 or 7 of them, but Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren are the most likely, I think, to be the nominee. I'm keeping an eye on Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker. I'm going to get to all of them in a minute, but I do think that while Democratic voters are happy to see a whole bunch of Democrats engaged and interested in winning the election, they also would like to see it narrow, and narrow pretty quickly, right? I was just at Michigan, and I was there for the Detroit debates, and when I asked voters what they're looking forward to, they're like, I really am looking forward to this field getting smaller, right? I can't take all of these people. We need to just shut it down. And if you look at the polling over the last year, it's been pretty consistent that those 4 candidates I mentioned are really ones taking the lion's share of the vote, with everybody else maybe in the single digits to 0 or 2%, right? What do Democrats want? They want lots of things, but mostly they want to beat Donald Trump, right? The #1 top thing that they want. I've been talking to voters since 2018 about this, and the question when I ask them what they're looking for or who they like or what they're thinking about candidates, it always comes back to, look, I don't really care who it is. Can they beat Trump? Are they, because this pair of glasses, I don't care. I don't care. You show me they beat Trump, fine, that's who I'm voting for, right? I'm not gonna get too emotionally attached to anybody this year. We don't have time for emotional attachment. We have to focus on winning, okay? And that's why Joe Biden, of course, has been doing as well as he has, because he has been ahead on the metric of who do you think can beat Donald Trump for quite some time. Just to give you a sense of where this beat Donald Trump versus other issues or focus on the policies, that's how I'm choosing my president or where my presidential nominee or where my heart is as a Democrat. Back at this point in 2015, okay, it wasn't as crowded of a primary, but still, it was a Democratic primary for the nomination. Back at this point in 2015, just 20% of Democrats said that they were choosing the candidate they were going to vote for in the primaries based on the candidate they thought had the best chance to win in November. 79% said, I'm going to pick the candidate whose policies are related to mine, right? Like I agree with most of their policy positions. Today, 45% say I want the candidate who can win in November, so it's twice as much, a little more than twice as much. Just 51% pick policy, okay? Now, Joe Biden is the candidate seen, at least by voters at this point, Democratic voters at this point, as having the best chance to beat Donald Trump. The last national poll I saw asking this question, the Quinnipiac poll that came out last week, 49% said this. They asked voters, Democratic voters, do you think he has the best chance? So he's at 49%. And then it drops way down. Bernie Sanders at 12%, Elizabeth Warren at 9%, Harris at 6%, and then, everybody else. Is that sort of 1 or 0? Fundamentally, though, I think that the choice offered to Democratic voters right now is really about not just beating Trump, but do you go in a big and bold? Do you want a nominee who is going for big, bold change, or one that's looking to make just more incremental change? And I have categorized the nomination fight right now into these 2 categories. One I would call the revolutionaries, and the others the restorers, okay? And the revolutionaries, not surprisingly, are people like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. Their theory of the case is not just that Donald Trump is a problem, needs to be defeated, but that he is a symptom of a larger structural problem in this country, in an inequality problem in this country. And it's not just about making little changes around the edges of healthcare, making little changes around regulation, making little changes around how we deal with the economic inequality, the imbalance. It's making big, bold change. On the other side, the restoration is Joe Biden, right? And he's like, you guys, seriously, everybody just wants to get back to normal, okay? Can we just get back to normal? Can we do that? I was supposed to be retired. I wasn't gonna do this. Trump is here. We can't have 4 more years of this. Just put me in. And look, people don't want more chaos. They're gonna have had 4 years of chaos and upheaval. They don't want that. They just wanna go to like, yeah, we wanna move forward, but let's do it in a really kind of incremental way, right? We wanna jump off the merry-go-round, not get on a different merry-go-round, all right? And then there are the other candidates who fit somewhere in between those. And, you know, on the Joe Biden side, you have the 2 people from Colorado, Governor Hickenlooper, former Governor Hickenlooper, Senator Bennett, Michael Bennett, Senator Amy Klobuchar, I would put in that category too, from Minnesota, all of whom are basically making that same argument. In fact, Michael Bennett made it even more explicit. The other day he said something like, just elect me, I'm super boring, right? Like, let's get back to boring. Boring's good. People like boring, right? I think it was something like, and I've heard him say this before, but you know, I'm the kind of president that literally you could go off of Twitter or go away for a week and you would come back to Twitter or come back from vacation and you won't have missed something that I did, right? You're not gonna come back and be like, what? I go off Twitter for 5 minutes and we're doing what, right? But the candidates then who are, as I said, in that category though of that restoration, they're not getting all that much traction, right? They're seen and they're being sort of put in this category being the moderates in the field, the ones saying, Warren, Sanders, they're going way too far. It's gonna make it too easy for Donald Trump to label Democrats as leftists, socialists, right? Folks like Harris, Booker, Buttigieg, they're somewhere in the middle there, though I would argue they're more to the left than they are toward where Biden is. Buttigieg is interesting in that, somebody said this the other day and it made a whole lot of sense to me. He's interesting in that while his style is very sort of calm, reasoned, he is actually proposing some pretty radical constitutional change. He is, for example, floated the idea of increasing the size of the Supreme Court to 15 members. 5 would be Ds, 5 would be Rs. The next 5 would be chosen by those 10. Theoretically, to take the partisanship out of it, but, right? But the point that he's making is the way that it's set up right now isn't working, and it's become just another partisan tool that the public distrusts. He also is one of many Democrats in this race who wants to get rid of the Electoral College and replace it with popular vote. Kamala Harris is trying to kind of play the middle here, like, I'm kind of with Bernie and Elizabeth Warren on this healthcare thing, but it's not gonna be as radical, but it's not gonna be totally separate from Obamacare, but it's gonna kind of be somewhere middle-y, but not so middle to be boring, but transformative enough, but not so crazy transformative that you're gonna lose your healthcare, right? But that seems to be a problem for her, at least in this last debate. And Booker's also trying to sort of, he has found his voice in some ways in these last few weeks. Certainly I've thought so in the debates. He has really stood his ground and been a much more forceful advocate for his candidacy, and yet it doesn't seem to be translating, at least not at this point. He too, I think, sort of doesn't have an easy to understand rationale for his candidacy in the way that those other 3 do. So who wins this thing? Ultimately, we've got a long way to go. We still, We had our official kickoff this week in Iowa. The Iowa State Fair started. Has anybody been to the Iowa State Fair? It's awesome. It's the only place, I think, maybe there are others, where you can eat a fried Oreo and watch a baby pig being born live. They have a barn, the birthing barn, it's true. You can go in and watch animals give birth. So that's interesting. But anyway, candidates go there. There were almost all of them made it to the Iowa State Fair. So it's the official kickoff for the Iowa caucuses, which take place in February. And in talking to people who are there, including my colleague Charlie Cook, who's just put 500 miles on his car, traveling around the state, it seems pretty clear that while Biden is ahead in the polls, his lead is very fragile. There is support for him. Again, this idea that, well, we think he's the guy that can beat Trump, but maybe, I don't know, he's a little bit too old, he's a little too establishment. There's not a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for him there. But he also has, what's unique about him is that he does have the deepest base. He has support from all of the different demographic groups, right? He's doing well with white voters, with voters of color, with younger voters, with older voters. He is I'm trying to think of the right restaurant here, but my analogy for him, he's like one of those nice, fast, casual restaurants where, you know when you have a big group of people and you're trying to figure out a place to eat, and you know that like you have kids, and you have somebody's a vegan, and somebody else wants a Manhattan, and somebody, wants a salad, and you can't figure out where you go, so you find this one restaurant that has everything, right? It's like an Applebee's or a Cheesecake Factory or one of those places. And everybody finds something that they like on the menu, and they're not hungry anymore. But they're not, like, excited about it, right? It's not the best meal they've ever had. It's not the worst meal they've ever had. It's just like, it's fine. Like, everybody's like, the kid got the, chicken tenders, and everybody's fine. But where he really does, and what's keeping his numbers as high as they are right now in the polls, is his support, especially from African-American voters, from older voters, and from moderate, self-described moderate voters. Those are three very, very important groups. Now, one of those groups does not really exist in Iowa. That's voters of color, right? So this is why Iowa could be really challenging for him. And Iowa in general has been really challenging for a frontrunner. It's a state that really, really likes to stick it to the frontrunner or to the status quo candidate, right? Hillary Clinton was supposed to win there in 2008. Well, she was supposed to easily win there in 2016. That didn't happen, right? Mitt Romney was supposed to win there easily in 2012. He almost got knocked off by Rick Santorum. Mike Huckabee was there in 2008, beating John McCain, right? So this is a place that does like to have spoilers, or they definitely like the candidate who's not representing the status quo. And Elizabeth Warren fits that category pretty well. And again, in talking to people who are in and around Iowa, she is getting the enthusiastic crowds. She has, on the ground, she invested very early, in the same way that the Obama campaign did in 2007, on field organizers. They are everywhere in the state. She's been, much like I was today on my mountain bike, very slow but steady, climbing up, right? She's not zipping up the mountain, but she's just kind of moving her way up. And she did this, you can see this in her national numbers, as well as in Iowa. And behind her, who she did pass on her way up the climb, is Bernie Sanders. Right? Now, Bernie Sanders' numbers in Iowa are not very good, especially for a guy who almost won it in 2016. And his national numbers have also been dropping. in large part because in 2016, he was the anti-establishment, and Hillary Clinton was the establishment. It was a very clear distinction. Now, there are a lot of anti-establishment candidates. Now there are a lot of progressive candidates. Now there are a lot of people, as Bernie Sanders likes to tell everyone, who have taken his rhetoric and his ideas, which is true, right? Nobody was talking about Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, free college, go through the litany. A lot of that started in 2016 with Bernie Sanders, right? But he's no longer the unique candidate. And up comes Elizabeth Warren, passing him on his left. Got it? I just thought of that. There we go. Kamala Harris is doing this thing where she has these real flashes of strength, but they're not very consistent, right? She had a great first debate, really caught Biden and pretty much everybody else flat-footed. And you saw her numbers kind of bump up, and the sort of chatter around the conventional wisdom class was, well, maybe, she's proving now that she can be the person to take on Donald Trump, right? If the issue is who can beat Donald Trump, well, she just went up there and pretty much took a knife to Joe Biden and carved him up pretty well. I guess she could do that with Donald Trump, right? But since then, it's been a little bit rocky. And the rationale for her candidacy, too, I think she's also struggled with. Somebody wrote this the other day, and I can't remember exactly who this was, so I apologize for stealing this from you, but was that she is this tremendous messenger looking for a message, looking for a compelling message to bring people in, right? Now there's still time, but I think that's what's been plaguing her as well, especially again when you're in a field with Elizabeth Warren, and part of her slow steadiness is just she has such a consistent message, right? Everybody knows who she is and why she's running. She does not mince words. She is not trying to be something she's not. She is exactly who she has been since she first got involved in political office, which is, I think, what a lot of the appeal for many Democratic voters is, right? When they see some of these other candidates who flip and flop or who take positions that are different from ones they've taken in the past, that's not gonna be Elizabeth Warren. I think what I'm looking for, and I am betting a lot of people here who are Democratic voters are looking forward to, is a debate where all of those candidates, the Biden, the Warren, the Sanders, the Harris, the Buttigieg, even Beto, are all on stage together, rather than having two nights with 10 people where we've talked about a whole lot of stuff and heard from people that are really wonderful people, but aren't gonna be on the stage. When we get to September and October, by the time we now winnow this field down, I think that is really going to be the next major test to see how, and if Biden really is this fragile frontrunner, then who's next? I mean, that's the question I hear all the time when I ask voters who say to me, well, I like Biden, but I don't know. And I said, okay, well, if it's not Joe Biden, then who? I don't know, right? I just don't know. There's no obvious second choice. Because again, it goes to the, but would someone in Wisconsin like Elizabeth Warren, not like her? Would someone in Pennsylvania vote for Kamala Harris? How's Pete Buttigieg gonna do in Florida, right? One colleague of mine said, the problem for so many Democratic voters this year is that they have pundit-itis. That instead of just voting their own, they're trying to put themselves in the shoes of a swing voter in a state they've never been to, right? I don't know. What would a white working class voter from central Pennsylvania think? I don't know, you don't know either. Just vote for someone. You're not gonna make that up. All right. So once we get to the 2020 general election, what is this gonna look like? As I said, I think where you're Joe Biden, what he would really like to see if he's the nominee is that this is simply a referendum on Donald Trump, much like the 2018 election was a referendum on Donald Trump. And where you saw that really play out was in the House, where Democrats won the national popular vote by almost 9 points. They picked up 40 seats. And where much of that gain came from were in places that Republicans used to do really well. The suburbs, especially the well-off suburbs in and around big major urban areas like Chicago and Philadelphia and Denver and Houston, Dallas. The most amazing thing about 2018 to me was to watch two things. The first, the suburban shift has been happened so quickly and so uniformly. It's not just, I think in the old days, like, I don't know, the early 21st century, which now feels like that was 1,000 years ago, you know, you could see that suburbs in the Northeast, like around Philadelphia or New York City or in New Jersey, they were starting to move from their ancestral Republican home to a more Democratic place, really based on cultural, social issues, right? They still liked the fiscal policies of the Republican Party, but really disagreed with them on many of the social and cultural issues. And so you could see them starting to drift to the Democratic Party. But what happened in 2018 was that suburbs, no matter where they were in the country, behaved almost exactly the same way. Whether you were in Orange County, California, just think of this for a minute. Orange County, California, the place that Ronald Reagan said all good Republicans go to die, right? It's like the most stalwart Republican county in America. All of the representatives are now Democrat. That was remarkable. That's not supposed to happen. And as I said, even in places like Texas, in and around Dallas and Houston, districts that had gone overwhelmingly in some cases for Mitt Romney, or at least had voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and then voted for a Democrat in Congress in 2018. Pretty remarkable. So we saw this swing all the way. The other thing that we noted was how closely tied the president's approval rating was to how a Republican candidate did in that district. So voters were not making this distinction between, well, I like my member, but I dislike the president. They were simply voting on their feelings on the president were dictating their vote. In fact, what CNN found going back in exit polls all the way to 1982 is that the correlation between your opinion of the president and how you voted was stronger than in any previous midterm election. So almost everybody who said they approved of Donald Trump voted for a Republican. Almost everybody who said they disapproved of the job Donald Trump was doing as president voted for the Democrat. That's the kind of election that Joe Biden would like to have, right? It's about the soul of America, it's about Donald Trump. That's what he wants that election to be. I think if you're Elizabeth Warren, you're Bernie Sanders, what you would like it to be is a combination. You want it to be a referendum on the president, but you also want it to be a referendum on this bigger structural change, that Americans are looking for more than just a not Trump. They want to see something much more significant happening in the institutions in this country, especially not just the political institutions, but the economic institutions as well. What the Trump campaign would like to do is to have 2016 all over again, right? Run that same play. They are like the team that, I don't know football very well, but I know that there are teams, right, that have that one play that they always do, that they're known for, and they just go back to it over and over and over again. And it can win, but it also means that you've got no room for error, right? If you're really relying always on your running back and that person gets injured, or the quarterback and that person gets injured, well, you don't have a backup plan to go to. He would like to make the election, as I said, about turning out his folks, not about bringing new people in. He is not interested in winning back those voters in the suburbs as much as he is about turning out voters who are not who dislike Democrats or who like him very much. I talked about the movement in 2018 of these suburban areas, which really is the movement of white, college-educated voters away from Republican to Democrat that we've seen over the last 10 years, but it definitely accelerated in this last 4 years. But what the president also has, what he has going for him is the fact that white voters, especially white voters without a college degree, have been moving dramatically away from the Democratic Party, and they're not moving back. And they are still very committed to the president. And this is what he is looking for right now, is to re-engage those voters, to turn them out, as he did in 2016, and to ensure not only that the folks who turned out in 2016 turn out again, but to find ones that they're missing. I know you hear a lot about the fact that the president's re-election campaign is spending a lot of money online, spending a lot of money on Facebook, outpacing the Democrats in that digital area. But what they are really doing is looking for and trying to find every single one of those types of voters that they may have missed in every one of these important states, find out where they are, who they are, and make sure they come out and vote. The president is not as interested in having a referendum election, which, again, if you're sitting president and the economy is doing as well as it is, you might think you would run a campaign saying, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? If so, vote for me. What the president is more interested in having is a cultural fight. What kind of America do you want to have? The America that I'm proposing, or the one that Democrats are proposing that's going to be about socialist healthcare and open borders, right? And they are going to take us so far left that all of the gains that this country has made over these last years of the Trump administration, but even before that, are going to be fettered away. And there are plenty of Democrats who are worried that he is getting some help, that Trump's getting some help, especially in these debates, from these Democratic debates, where so many of the candidates on stage are moving very far to the left on issues like immigration and healthcare and economic inequality, that it makes Trump's case for him. But what he would really like to do is make the Democratic candidate as unpopular as he is and have a race to see who can win of the two most unpopular candidates, because that's what 2016 was, remember? Nobody liked anybody that election. That was an election where you had the two most unpopular people in modern American history fight against each other to win the mantle of who is the least liked president-elect in history. Had Donald Trump not won, Hillary Clinton would have also gotten the mantle of the least liked president in American history, the person with the highest negatives in American history. So it was also an election where in exit polls, when the question was asked if you liked, so they asked the question on exit polls, do you like this person? Do you like this person? You liked both candidates, you dislike both candidates. The dislike both candidates number in 2016 was 18%. The highest it has ever been before 2016 was 10%. And of the people who decided late, okay, people who did not make up their mind until very close to Election Day, they weren't holding off on picking because they just didn't know the difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Like, oh, what, there's an election? I don't know. Who are these two people? Never heard of them. No, they didn't. They were waiting till the last minute because they really disliked both of them. 40% of late deciders said they disliked both candidates, right? It's a pretty big chunk of people. And at the end, they broke decidedly for Donald Trump. When you look at who those people were who broke at the end, you ask them what was the most important issue for them, or actually, it was asked this way. This is part of the reason why 2016 turned out the way it turned out, was when you ask the question, who do you think is, of Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, best able to be commander-in-chief, is most prepared to be the president of the United States. Hillary Clinton won that 80%. Who do you think is going to bring about change? Donald Trump, 78, 80%, right? So they picked change over over someone who they thought was more prepared for the job. But again, many of them were doing this not because they necessarily liked one more than the other, just because they didn't have a choice. Again, if this is the situation that Trump would like to see, if you're making voters choose between one really disliked Democrat and a president who also has very high negatives, right? Make that choice once again. That's how you win the Electoral College. The challenge, though, I think, is that the Democrats are much more motivated today than they were in 2016. I know there's a lot of concern in Democratic circles that this primary process is going to be divisive. It's going to leave the candidates with a lot of bruises. Every party who's out of power watching their own party go through a primary thinks this. Sometimes it's true, but a lot of times, and this is what happened in 2016, the motivation to win is bigger than the motivation to only turn out for the candidate that you love, right? And I think Democrats are in a much different place today than they were, for example, back in 2016. So all that's to say is, if you live in one of those battleground states, I'm very sorry. It's not going to be a pretty election. It's going to be pretty negative. It's going to feel somewhat familiar to what you've seen in 2016. But once we get a little bit closer and get through, as I said, the next few debates, get through the first few primaries, we'll have a better sense of what this matchup is going to look like and how the Trump campaign will be able to react to who that nominee is, or whether they will, as this president has done since the very beginning, just run that same playbook, which is what I expect to see him doing. Before we get to questions, which I'm very much looking forward to, just wanted to end this on sort of a, well, what comes next idea? What happens after 2020, whether the president's reelected or not? I think that this idea that we're going to move from where we are now to this sort of back to normal when Trump is no longer president, whether it's in 2021 or after he serves a second term, is not really borne out in reality. I think that the forces that got us to where we are didn't just come out of nowhere. They didn't just come with Donald Trump. They'd been building, and I'd argue at least for 20 years, if not longer. We've been building and building and building to this point. And the forces that got us to this point aren't going away in 2021. And they're not going away in 2025, right? The technological, demographic, economic change that is so fast and so furious and is pulling us so far apart is going to continue. The business model for news media is still one that is driven in large part by driving outrage. And it's the same thing that drives social media too, right? What do you want, more clicks, or do you want more thoughtful discussions, right? Thoughtful discussions are nice, but they don't pay the bills. Outrage pays the bills because it gets people to click and to interact. And that's not going away either. We have a society that is more demographically diverse than we've ever had in our history. And that's not changing anytime soon either. So how are we going to balance all of these things? I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a historian. So I like to listen to people who do know a lot more about these things than I do. And where they are right now, for many of them, is they're less pessimistic than I think a lot of folks are, who are watching this time that we're in and feeling like we're headed into a very dangerous spiral, which we could be. But we also know the history of this country is one that polarization has been at the core of who we are from the very beginning on pretty much every level. And it's quite remarkable that we've been able to figure this out and be pulled back together. I mean, I was reading something a few years ago about the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention, and that the conventional wisdom right after the American Revolution was that the US was going to basically be like Europe. It was going to have these sort of country states, because there was no way, that was the thinking at the time, there's no way that you could pull this diverse country together without something in common. And for all these years, the common was the Brits, and now common enemy's gone, and they don't really have anything else to keep them united. And so this polarization and this division is the norm, it's not the outlier, right? And we've gone through a lot of it. And unfortunately, a lot of it has been violent, and a lot of it has led to some pretty horrible things. But we have somehow made it over to the other side, and it feels like we are at this point. I always keep thinking we're at this tipping point. Maybe we're gonna see the other side. I don't know that we will, but when you're at an inflection point like we are now, it's really uncomfortable to be in it because you can't see what's over on the other side. But we can either fix and solve these challenges that face us, or they just continue to be used to continue to polarize us, right? The problems aren't insurmountable. We disagree on the solutions is a big piece of this. But actually a bigger piece is that we are disagreeing so much on the problems that we then discount everybody else's opinions. So my top priority may not be your top priority. And in that sense, what I will do is say, if you're not focusing on my priority, then you must be a terrible person, right? But this ability to solve the challenges and define ourselves beyond polarization is not something that right now there is much incentive. Certainly not, as I said, in our media culture and not in our political culture either. Part of the reason, though, that I am optimistic, besides, as I said, listening to historians and reading other folks who have watched what people have done before this, is that I just feel as if the people who are in charge of the system may be failing us. The rest of us are doing a pretty good job of it in our communities and in keeping ourselves connected to one another in ways that don't get as much attention as the national brouhaha, but it's still very important. What I worry about division, of course, and the polarization and what it leads to, but I worry much more about folks being disengaged and deciding it's not worth it anymore. That to me is more dangerous than any polarization that we could have in this country right now. And so my only advice to folks out here, you're obviously very engaged people. You live in Steamboat Springs and you're spending a beautiful evening listening to politics. I love you all, but that is super not normal, okay? That's like beyond dorky. But I love you for it because it's what I want to do too, all right? And that's not normal. That's okay. You don't have to be this engaged to be engaged. What I'm talking about are people in your life who you know are saying, I just can't do this anymore. I'm not talking to these friends. I'm not talking to this family. I'm not listening to the news anymore. I'm not going to go vote. None of it matters. It's all a joke. It's all rigged. That's when things really get bad. That's when I really start to worry. So you re-engaging with those folks, finding a way to keep them connected, finding a way to tell them that it matters and the importance of it, even if it's you personally being that person, I think is the most important thing that we can do. So I am hopeful that we are going to get to the other side of this. it is just going to be a slog, like much of what we've gone through in this country, to get to that side. But I have ultimate confidence that once we get there, we will be able to find a way, at some point, we will find a way to make these institutions that have not been up to par, that haven't been able to keep up with our 21st century reality, to finally keep up with us. So I thank you all for being here. I thank you for being engaged. I want you to keep people in your life engaged. And I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. So thank you very much. Go right ahead.
I'll see if, is this on? Yes.
All right.
Following up on exactly what you just ended with, Amy, how can we increase voter participation, which is very low? You have the data on particularly all presidential elections.
Well, you know, the best thing for voter participation apparently has been the president, because we had the highest turnout in 2018 than we've had in a midterm election in 100 years. The interest in this election right now, when you look, polls ask the question, how enthusiastic are you about the upcoming election? We are at levels now, more than a year out from an election, that we normally see in the fall of an election year. When I talk to strategists for campaigns, they're expecting that this election is going to break all records for turnout. In fact, that's a bigger challenge right now for campaigns is, usually you know what the turnout's going to look like because it's pretty consistent year after year, but now you're going to get new people coming in the system, which is good for democracy. But as a campaign, if you want to know who those people are, so it's adding to some of the question marks about who and how are we going to see this turnout.
How does this relate to voter registration?
You mean people registering and getting their vote?
In addition to people coming out, first they have to be registered.
Yeah, they have to be registered. And, look, there has been debate now, it's been going on for quite some time, about access to polls. There are some states that have, California being one of them, that have incredibly liberal voting access. You can be a permanent absentee. You can register very easily to vote. They make it, I think of them as sort of a laboratory on this, about getting voter engagement. And what's interesting, I wrote a few years ago about how California had done all of this work to try to answer that question. How do we get voters more engaged, right? The problem is, voters don't have access to the polls, or they need, to be able to vote absentee, or we're going to do this new primary system where you can vote for any candidate. You don't just have to be in a Democratic or Republican primary. All candidates are on the same ballot, and the top two candidates are going to make it to the general election. That will increase participation. And in the 2014 midterm elections, they had some of the lowest turnout that they'd ever had in California. But what matters, of course, more than anything, access is important, being able to register is important, but it's thinking that it matters, right? You have to believe that your vote matters, that you're going to actually go through the process of signing up and registering, that you're going to go through the process of showing up to vote, voting in a primary. And if you believe that you don't matter and your voice doesn't matter, then you're not going to vote. If you think it's important, and that's why the 2018 election was very heartening for folks who are worried about declining interest in the process, is to see turnout numbers. I mean, we looked at the turnout numbers in some of these states and districts that hit presidential level turnout. That doesn't happen in a midterm. A midterm is usually 60% of what a presidential election is. We were seeing, in some cases, over 100% of what they got in the 2016 election. That was pretty remarkable.
Well, you talked a lot about how, who will be, not by name, the whole process of picking the candidates. What about some of the big policy issues that once a candidate is selected, that both Trump and the candidate will be facing in public policy issues?
That's a great question. And, you look at the data and what voters are the most interested in. Healthcare is at the very top of the list. And right now, what you're watching is the Democratic Party trying to figure out amongst itself, amongst the candidates, and then ultimately the voters of who vote in Democratic Party primary, determining what the policy position the Democratic nominee will have on the healthcare debate. Is it the Joe Biden and some of the other candidates' position, which is build on what we have, take what Obamacare and make it better, fix some of the stuff that's broken, but don't throw it out, we don't need Medicare for all? Or is it Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren version, which is total Medicare for all, we're gonna transition to this in pretty short order? That's gonna be a big debate that hasn't been decided yet on the Democratic side. It's certainly gonna be a debate in the 2020 election. It was the key issue in the 2018 midterm elections, but Democrats were completely on the offense then. I don't know if any of you watched any of the ads. I do that for fun. Literally, I watch campaign ads for fun. And what you saw over and over again in every district, didn't really matter where it was in the country, was Republicans voted for a bill that would gut or take out the protections for pre-existing conditions, right? That was their message in every single ad, right? Republicans want to take away your healthcare protections. Me, Democrat candidate, they would say, want to make sure that we protect those. That was a very effective message for Democrats in 2018, which is why when I talk to a lot of Democratic strategists now, they're like, can we just go back and do what we did in 2018? That worked really well. Make Trump and Republicans answer why they voted to repeal but had no answer for what the replacement would be to Obamacare. Make Trump answer why his administration has signed on to a court brief and a court case that would gut Obamacare, again, without a replacement. Rather than allowing, this is Democratic strategy saying this now, what Democrats are doing to themselves is making the fight about the internal Democratic fight. So I think healthcare is obviously going to be the #1 issue. We're gonna hear a lot about immigration. Interest in immigration has obviously skyrocketed up. It's also where the president would like to have this debate, is on immigration. Where the president, again, should have this debate, where he should want to have this debate, is on the economy, right? You got a 51% approval rating on the economy. You have people saying they're doing well in this economy. Of course, there are people who are not doing well in this economy. There are people who are struggling. That is all true and fair. But you go with where your strength is, and campaigning is not rocket science. You lean in to where you're strong. You try to avoid the things where you're not strong. He wants to lean into immigration and culture and make this a choice election. And I think he's going to talk about the economy, but not as much as sort of a traditional president would coming into this re-election.
This is a pretty complicated question.
Okay.
Russia wants Trump to get reelected. China does not. What do you think about the odds of these two superpowers launching sort of a proxy war, both using cyber means, social media, and disinformation to influence the election?
It's happening now. One of my favorite stories I did for The Takeaway was a couple weeks ago. And I interviewed two women, one of whom used to work at the Department of Homeland Security and has been active in cybersecurity issues for a long time. And another is a young woman who started on a campaign in a Senate race, sort of taught herself how to combat misinformation about her candidate that was coming through social media, and now has been sounding the alarm for a while now about disinformation campaigns. And what they both said was, not only is this already happening, but what is really powerful about what these outside bad actors are doing is, we hear things like they're going to meddle an election and think of things like, well, they're going to go into the voter rolls, right? They're going to change actual votes, or they're going to go into the voting machines, right? And they can hack into voting machines. And you just need to change 3 votes in 3 precincts, in enough places, and suddenly you can change the election. What they said, the real worry and the real thing we should be concerned about is these disinformation campaigns. And what they do so brilliantly is they first of all, they know enough about America and American culture and the dividing lines, the things that really do inflame both sides. And they look for instances and cases of that, and then they promote them through social media channels, and those promotions ultimately get picked up sometimes by mainstream news sources, and a lot of it is absolutely 100% false. And the one example, she gave 2 examples. One was in Germany, where a girl said she had been sexually assaulted by an immigrant, and the story was, was starting to make its way around, and Russian influencers, social media, internet group got a hold of this, started pumping out all of this stuff about it. Can you believe this? These women are being targeted, these immigrants are coming in, they're attacking women. Well, the real story was that she ultimately, when she was being interviewed by police, admitted that she had made the whole story up because she didn't want to admit to her parents that she had stayed out overnight with a friend of hers. But by the time that got out, what had already happened was they had flamed so much in this town in Germany that there were even like riots on the streets, okay? So a story that was totally not true, they were able to push it out and get it enough attention, even within German society, that it was able to influence the way that these German citizens saw the story first. And then trying to tell people that that's not true is much harder, right? What disinformation, how it works so brilliantly is it feeds not on conspiracy theories, right? We think of disinformation as like, I'm not gonna fall for conspiracy theory. I'm a lot smarter than that. And what they do is they find things that are believable enough. And we all have our biases. So we're all we hear certain things that are like, I don't believe that. You hear something else, you go, that could be true, right? And then you amplify it over and over and over again. So that's happening. That's already happening. And what the goal, whether it's Russia or China, is not as much about who is the president as that the society doesn't trust the institutions. They are diligently going after not just elections, but also our justice system to try to sow even more discontent and more distrust. And so their goal isn't to just, oh, this is the president that we want. Their goal is for voters and for Americans to say, this entire system is corrupt. I don't trust anybody or anything and have no faith in the American system. And that is much scarier, quite frankly, than one election.
Last question is your role as a journalist. I'm combining 2 questions here. What are your sources to read and understand before forming your very fine analyses? And what has it been for you personally, being a journalist during the Trump administration?
Okay, here we go. Those are excellent questions. So, like many of you, I go and use some of the very similar resources, right? The national newspapers now, between the New York Times and the Washington Post, and now the LA Times, they have been doing amazing work, in part because they invested in reporters. They, I don't know anybody's opinions about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, et cetera, but he invested very, very heavily into the people at the newspaper, right? And the more people and the more reporters you have, the more stuff you can get. So they're doing incredible work. Unfortunately, it's not working out very well for local reporters, and the death of local reporting and local news, I think, is a big part of how we got to where we are in our polarization. I think we've just become so nationalized that the unique and parochial interests that once did influence how we voted and thought about candidates and issues is no longer there. Just as an example, as voters, we are not splitting our ticket in the way that we used to. In the 2016 election, there was not one candidate for Senate who won in a state that the presidential candidate did not also win, okay? So no blue candidate won in a state that Trump won, and no red candidate won in a state that Hillary Clinton won. So we are slowly, they are doing very good work, but again, I think, unfortunately, it has narrowed the fact that we're getting less and less local news has become a big problem. I also am a big fan of people who are doing really good work in data analysis, and you can follow a lot of them on Twitter. And I won't go into all of them, but they're the folks at The Upshot and the New York Times do really fantastic work. At 538 also do good work. Harry Enton, who is at CNN.com. All of them are doing what I like to be able to do, which is sort of detaching the emotion from politics and just trying to look as much as possible at what the data is telling us. And then you'll see that the emotion will be a part of that ultimately, but at least getting to that piece. In terms of working in Washington now and covering politics now, the funny thing is, I'm not doing anything in a way different than what I've always done, right? We cover politics, we cover campaigns. The motto of the Cook Political Report, since it was founded more than 30 years ago, was we're nonpartisan, we don't care who wins or loses, we just don't want to be wrong in what our predictions were, right? And that was just the way that we'd always done things, and that didn't seem that odd. And now, in this era where everything is so hyper-polarized, including the media sources, we look like a sort of a fish out of water. So we haven't really done anything or changed. It seems that so much around us really has. But it is exhausting. I'm not going to lie about that. And it's just the constant drumbeat and the constant stirring of anger and outrage is, I can't with it. I really. So it's important to take the step away from that part. Again, there's a difference between stepping away from the outrage cycle and disengaging completely from politics. And that's what I'm trying to find that balance to do. I do worry about a couple of things. One, I worry about a generation of young reporters who's growing up in this era thinking that this is how politics is normally and don't have the perspective of what it has looked like. I worry too about, we've been really lucky up until this point that while the news media has been vilified by the president, attacked, the fake news, all of that, no attacks physically, violently toward reporters has occurred. I worry about that. I worry a lot about things that I didn't worry about before, like covering a convention. That wasn't supposed to be a duty that was considered dangerous. But I was very worried about it in 2016, and thankfully nothing happened, but I'm much more nervous now going into the 2020 conventions. So I think all of us are on edge a lot more the city feels on edge. If anybody's come to Washington recently, if you've been there, I know a lot of folks here are folks who've spent time in Washington in the past, either lived there or spent some time there. It just feels a lot different. It does feel like a city that's constantly clenched. So I don't know that that's very good for all of our blood pressure. But
Well,
that's
we have 15 months to see what's going to happen.
Yes.
And on that note, Amy, thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank
much.
you very much. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you.